Senator Tammy Duckworth of Illinois is an Iraq War veteran, a Purple Heart recipient, and was among the first Army women to fly combat missions during Operation Iraqi Freedom. She was also the former Assistant Secretary of the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs. Welcome, Senator.
For having me.
Well, first question I want to ask you, your vast experience in the military, military hero, how has that translated to Congress, specifically on the Senate Armed Services Committee, in pushing, in oversight, in legislating, maybe helping your colleagues understand things that they would not understand because of your experience?
Thank you. Well, I'm not a hero. The men on my crew who saved my life were the heroes. But I will tell you that the military experience I bring with me to Congress serves me in a couple of different ways. One is, of course, as you've mentioned, I bring a perspective of the everyday soldier who's had to carry out missions and had to use the equipment that we on the Armed Services Committee either fund or not fund. And the policies that we put forward and having to live that and sort of giving that perspective of everything that we're asking our troops to do on a regular basis. Having been a commander of a unit to be able to bring that perspective forward. The other aspect of it is that it actually allows me to have a point of commonality with my colleagues on the other side of the aisle. So even from my first days when I first served in the House, I started working with my colleagues on the other side of the aisle who were also Iraq War vets, who were also military vets, and were able to expand that friendship, that point of commonality of joint military service, even into other areas beyond my work on the Armed Services Committee.
Can you talk about modernization, where we need to go? There are threats all around the globe. We have a raging war in Ukraine. But specifically on U.S. modernization, fifth-generation platforms, advanced engines, there are so many things that we have to advance in order to compete with our rivals, and it seems to be like rivals are they're building by the day.
They are, but the United States has several advantages, right? One is the capability of our non-military industrial base. We have a lot of innovation. We are far more innovative than any other nation on the face of the earth. And that is really something we should be harnessing. I also think, if you're talking about fifth generation, sixth generation platforms, we have to look at the fact, frankly, that in the aviation and air power, that development is no longer linear. It's been linear since the Wright brothers flew the first aircraft, and it was linear in terms of how we fought war from the first biplanes in World War II going into in World War I, going into World War II and onwards. But now we're also now looking at space, and we're looking at all the different ways that we can use air power that may not be that linear of faster, stronger, heavier, bigger, more lethal. It may be more relying on, as we have already seen, drones, but some of these drones don't have to be the biggest, the fastest, the heaviest. So it may be swarms of drones that are gathering information. I think of the way I used to fly air assault missions is that, you would have the OH-58s, right? The scouts would go out first and look in front. Well, maybe it's not the scout that's going out first. Maybe that scout aircraft is now controlling a fleet of drones in front of me. So looking at what we can do with forces that are going into suborbital flight and maybe re-entering the Earth's atmosphere, all sorts of stuff that we should be looking at. And so that development is no longer linear like it has been through our history. And that is why I think we really need to have the maximum technology and acquisition flexibility and take advantage in the United States of the civilian capabilities that we have beyond just the military-industrial complex.
Senator, as you know, there's a lot of politics about the defense spending level. Some want it lower, some want it significantly higher. The Biden administration came in with a proposal of just over 3%. My last guest, Congressman Whitman from Virginia, noted that inflation's at 6%. Is 3% enough? And how do you see the defense budget debate going forward this spring?
I don't want to put an actual number on it, but I do think we need to increase our spending in some areas. For example, we need to make serious investments in our submarine force. It is one of our areas of where we lead, continue to lead, and certainly a pacing item for us as we look towards the future. But there are still places that we can also save money as well, and we need to be serious about that. So I think for me, it's again going back to what I said, acquisition flexibility. We need to make those investments where we need to, but there are ways that we can also accelerate the DoD's acquisitions cycle, make it cheaper, working with civilian counterparts, maximizing our use of all types of industries. We've got last year, the Defense Innovation Unit opened a new office in Chicago that is really going to be better at helping us tap the Midwestern industrial base. Similarly, Manufacturing Times Digital, also located in Chicago, is one of the manufacturing institutes that is founded in partnership between civilian institutions and DoD. So I think we need to look at ways we can save money in that acquisition process and that development process. But there's going to be some very sort of classic military spending that's going to require more spending, not the least of which is our submarine forces.
What about the future of Ukraine aid? Basically, the talking point from the White House is we're going to do this as long as it takes. And the talking point from Kevin McCarthy is not going to give Ukraine a blank check. The support for Ukraine has been fairly strong in polls, but we're seeing it slip, certainly among Republicans. Where do you see that going? Do you think there's enough support in divided government to give Ukraine what they need to defeat Russia?
I think very much so, especially as Russia continues to be a very bad actor in terms of their mistreatment and inhumane treatment of civilians. The fact that the International Criminal Court just published, this case against Vladimir Putin is critically important. And I think that there is very strong bipartisan support, at least here in the Senate, and especially the Senate leadership, for continuing to provide aid to Ukraine.
We've had some time now since the spy balloon from China was shot down. What's your analysis of that? Many experts are saying this was a test for the United States. Some said the balloon should have been shot down before, but the White House said, well, that wouldn't have been safe. But really remarkable brashness from China. What was your take of it, and what do we have to be wary of in the future?
Well, I'm wary of how many balloons are up there. I think one of the things we learned was that there are a lot of balloons floating up there that we need to know more about. And many of them are benign and are being put up there by research institutions like universities and like. And as the chairwoman of the aviation subcommittee on the Commerce Committee, and we're going through FAA reauthorization right now, we, I think, have to have a real serious conversation about how do we track these aircraft that are floating at these very high levels, some of them, above commercial airspace, but below space itself, and who controls that airspace, and maybe we need to start looking at more requiring these balloons to be transmitting their locations. And so for me, the takeaway was how many are up there, and are we not tracking them all?
There's a big hearing today on TikTok. Do you think that TikTok should be banned? I mean, my kids are on TikTok, and there's some concern among some Democrats that if you ban TikTok, there could be actually a backlash among younger voters. But there's obviously a national security major concern with TikTok right now.
Well, I think there'd be a backlash in my own household because I have a 5-year-old and an 8-year-old who are desperate to get TikTok on their phones and have not been allowed to have TikTok on their phones. I have real concerns with TikTok as long as it is owned by a Chinese company. We know that the PRC has this relationship with their businesses that are really controlled by the Chinese government. There's a sharing of information. There's even joint efforts within the PRC's industries and their government, for example, stealing information and stealing intellectual property from American firms like they did when they stole from Lockheed Martin, and solved problems with their own jets landing gear when they stole information on landing gear on the F-35 development, for example. So I have real concerns about TikTok. I'm glad it is banned from government devices. I'm not sure where I am about outright banning it. I'm leaning more towards that. But certainly the fact that there's no governance structure, right? No way that we can force a requirement to govern who puts what on this platform that's really harming our children.
What are your biggest concerns over the short term and long term? Some people say maybe it could be short term, but certainly China's aggression with Taiwan in the South China Sea. But around the globe, obviously there's so many, Iran, North Korea. But what keeps you up when you get these classified briefings of what's a real danger, an immediate danger?
Well, no, I'm certainly worried about Taiwan, and we need to invest more in Taiwan and ramp up the speed at which they can become that porcupine that we talked about on the Armed Services Committee. I passed the Taiwan Defense Act to create a National Guard partnership with Taiwan so that we can train the National Guard in Taiwan the way we train the military in Ukraine. Since the annexation of Crimea, the National Guard has been training, and in fact, the Illinois National Guard has been providing some of that training of the Ukrainian forces now for the last 8 years, which is one of the reasons why the Ukrainian military has been able to fight so well, is because they've been trained for the last 8 years. We need to do the same thing and ramp up that training and equipping of Taiwan in the short term. But I also think, the thing that keeps me up at night is the fact that the PRC is everywhere, and we are not everywhere the PRC is, and we need to be a presence around the world, in particular in the Indo-Pacific region, and not just militarily. The militarily is important. Maintaining the rule of law, the freedom of navigation is really important, but we need to be there as a presence as well. What I've heard from countries like Indonesia and Cambodia and other places is that they want America to be present. We are still the partner of choice economically. They don't want to have to choose between the U.S. and the PRC, but they actually want us there. They want us to be a presence, and it is important that we start showing up. And what keeps me up at night is also what's happening in Africa. I don't think that we have visibility in Africa the way we should.
That's a good point. I did want to ask you about the budget. Defense officials have been frustrated with Congress because, as you know, there's been a lot of CRs, a lot of punting on funding. How important is it, and there is talk in both the House and Senate of trying to do the regular order and not put everything together in an omnibus and have hearings so bills can move individually. Can that happen in the divided Senate right now?
I don't know that we can. I don't know that skipping an omnibus is the way forward, but I will tell you that passing a defense budget in a timely manner is absolutely critical, and it's the right thing to do for the American taxpayers. Studies have shown that if we would just pass the defense budget on a timely manner, we would actually save something like $40 billion. That's a lot of money we can save simply by doing things on time. And certainly we in Congress need to do a better job of getting things done in a timely manner. And I certainly do not want a CR. I can't imagine getting into a CR at the start of a 2-year cycle that will begin the presidential cycle. And we'll just end up kicking the can down the road for the next 2 years. And, that is something I do not want to see. So I do want to see the budget passed this year and in a timely way.
Well, we'll be watching. Senator, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me on.